From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta. With exactly 4 weeks before a possible partial government shutdown, the question hanging over Lansing: where do things stand in state budget negotiations?
2 months past the July 1st statutory deadline, the Republican-controlled State House just last week delivered the rest of their budget. But it appears to be a non-starter in the Democratic-controlled State Senate, which passed their own budget months ago.
So, what happens next?
We asked that question to the chairs of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. Those are the committees that oversee the state budget in their respective chambers.
We spoke first with Republican Representative Ann Boland.
I started by asking her just how concerned Michiganders should be that the House budget was 2 months late and we're now only 1 month away from the constitutional deadline.
I remain optimistic. I am a, half full glass of water gal, not a half empty. And I think if there's a will to get this done, we can get it done. We delivered our House education budget in June. We've been waiting all summer. We stand ready to negotiate that. Now we have our general fund, our omnibus bill out. And, we've been having lots of conversations since that rolled out last week. Again, I am hopeful that, we need to just continue to get in the room, have the conversations, and get this done.
I think a lot of folks, both in Lansing and outside of Lansing, are curious about that latter part of what you just said about getting in the room and negotiating. Where do negotiations stand right now that you've actually released and shared your version of the budget?
Well, I can tell you, since last Wednesday, there have been meetings, there have been conversations, and we continue to have those. They will unfold in the days ahead. Again, I am optimistic. The House has put all their cards on the table. We've laid out our roads plan. We've laid out our education plan. We've laid out our omnibus plan. They're all structurally balanced. And again, just call on the other parties. Let's get it done.
So I hear you say negotiations are happening. We should note that when Republicans put out this budget, Democrats really were furious. They say there was this 800-page budget that they only had some 30 minutes to look at before it was put up for a vote. You're saying negotiations are happening, but what's the mood right now after that?
I would say that, one, it's conversations, it's negotiations, it's discussion, it's a lot of things, right? And yes, it is a big bill. There's a lot of pages to it, I understand. But we've also been pressed by my colleagues across the aisle about the urgency in putting it forward. That's what we've done. It is out there. Our process was much more deliberative than it's ever been in the past. And I think that that's reflected. Those hearings that we've held since roughly March show in our budget proposal. And again, it's time to get to the table and let's have a real constructive conversation. Understand the Senate's budget is not structurally balanced. It does not provide for a roads plan. And so we need them to come to the table with a little bit clearer picture of what they're looking for and how they think we can get there, just as we have.
But Representative, this was a different process this year than the way it's usually done in the legislature. Why not go through the time-tested process of negotiating budgets first through committee, floor votes, and then getting these into joint House and Senate conference committees to reconcile those final versions of budget bills? This was one chamber, one caucus kind of unilaterally saying we're going to do it our way. What did the public gain by that?
I will tell you, let's go back from the beginning. When I was first appointed the Approps Chair, I said we are going to have a very deliberative process. It's going to be more intensive, more transparent than it's been in the past. And that is what we did. I've met my commitment on that. That's what we called for. We passed a resolution unanimously in our chamber for more transparency on the earmarks. We continued with hearings in the summer for those. But I think two significant things happened during this process that we had to, we anticipated, but we absolutely had to plan for. And that is the May consensus revenue estimating conference, where we saw the projections were different than what were anticipated in January. And that made sense to go back and take those into consideration. And the other one was we had anticipation that there was going to be a large federal bill passed, what is often referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill, that was going to pass. And, the president and the feds have said that, they expected it. Their goal was to be by July 4th. And it was early July. And I think we would have been remiss had we not taken those two significant factors into play with our budget. We would have been back at the drawing table. If we put it out June 30th or June, we still would have been where we're at today in trying to accommodate those two significant factors.
As you noted, those revenue numbers are no longer on target. There is a process for reconciling that. Why not call a consensus revenue conference to come up with an agreed upon set of numbers that the House, the Senate, and the governor's budget office can work with?
We have had conversations with the budget office and with the Senate. And, when this came out, especially the One Big Beautiful Bill, if you will, came out, there were lots of reports that were out. We really took into consideration the House Fiscal Agency. I've read most of those reports, and they're all the same and they're all a little bit different, right? And we still have a job to do and look at, how do we want these things? How are they going to impact Michigan? How are we going to move forward? And I realize the timeline, maybe some people aren't saying it's optimum, but we put a shutdown prevention plan on the table back in the springtime as well. The school aid budget. Now there seems to be an urgency and a push from the outside, but where was the urgency, on July 1 when we passed the school budget?
Representative, finally, in just a couple of minutes we have left, let's talk about what comes next. There is a $6 billion difference with the Republican House budget and the Democratic Senate budget. There is going to have to be compromise. Where might that compromise come from?
Well, I will say that I think it's going to have to come more from the Senate and the admin. And I will say it's not just a $6 billion. Remember, the admin nor the Senate put $3 billion for roads in their budgets. They've all acknowledged them, but neither have put that number in their budgets. All right. And we pulled back. Two significant examples where we didn't have to cut, where we found money, were the unfilled FTEs, full-time equivalencies. That totals a little over $500 million. And the other one is in the work projects, over $5 billion in work projects that are sitting on the books. Much of it is unobligated. So if we just took those into consideration and got some movement from the admin and the Senate to agree on those, I think we'll find that we have a fiscally responsible and sustainable budget that delivers for people on behalf of the governor, on behalf of the Senate, and on behalf of the House.
Can we be confident a budget will be done by October 1st, the start of the new state fiscal year?
Well, I will tell you, Rick, I am going to do everything within my power and my strength to make sure that we do that. I am committed 100% to doing it, but doing what's right for the people across the state of Michigan. And that means delivering on education, public safety, roads, our most vulnerable, without raising taxes, and a budget that's structurally balanced. We can do this. There has to be a will. I'm confident we can get it done.
Republican Representative Ann Bolin. She is chair of the House Appropriations Committee. Representative, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Let's turn now to Democratic Senator Sarah Anthony. She chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Senator, from your perspective, why is there no budget deal this far past the July 1st statutory deadline?
This is what I'll say. The House has been late to the party. The reality is that the governor laid out her budget plan in the spring. The Senate did the same. We have been ready and waiting at the negotiations table since May. And just recently, weeks before the budget deadline, the House has finally begun to engage. So if I'm leaning into my pettiest side, I'm saying it's about time we can finally start negotiating. If I'm being the mature, experienced Senate Appropriations Chair, I am optimistic that cooler heads and compromise will allow this process to go forward and we can avoid a shutdown.
Senator, can you explain something to me? We just got off the line also with your counterpart in the House, Republican Chair Bolin, who says negotiations are ongoing. But then when we ask, well, what needs to happen to get a budget done? She says, well, negotiations. Where do conversations and talks about the budget stand right now?
Yeah, I mean, I try to lead into as much honesty as possible. We have just begun negotiating in earnest because the House just began to engage. That is a shame. I think that that is a disgrace that in a time in which Michigan families expect elected officials in the Capitol to be working around the clock, they have expected us to do the normal process and start engaging and negotiating and having productive conversations months ago. But again, with a few weeks ago, maybe a week ago, the Republicans began to, in earnest, pass budgets out. And the devils are in the details. They have had lots of press conferences and statements that have talked about what they want to see in the state's budget, but what they passed out of their chamber is pretty egregious. I mean, drastic cuts that will ultimately hurt Michigan families and gut public safety and essential services. So now that we know where their values lie and the proposed cuts that they're putting in the table, now the negotiations start in earnest.
Senator, you're unhappy with the House Republican budget, and we do know the revenue projections from that May conference that sets a common budget number is outdated due to the federal One Big Beautiful Budget Bill law. Do you see space to cut and to compromise?
There's absolutely always room to compromise. It's what we do every single year. But the reality is congressional Republicans have done a work on the state's balance sheet. And so it feels so irresponsible for the Michigan House Republicans to do the same thing. I mean, gutting food assistance programs, $80 million reduction for direct care workers, $75 million cut to revenue sharing. These are the things that help our local governments thrive. And the drastic cuts to public health. I mean, these are things that are not partisan and people rely on. Things like school meals, something that parents across the state are lifting their voices and saying, enough, at least make sure that our kids eat breakfast and lunch. So there's always room to compromise, but we're not going to do that on the backs of working families in Michigan. It's a non-negotiable. So we always look for efficiencies. We always look for ways that we can compromise, but it just makes it hard when the Republicans in the House have set us up for essentially 2 to 3 weeks worth of negotiations in a process that normally takes 6 to 8. So it really has set us up for a lopsided negotiation, but the Senate is just not going to cut our way into very difficult time for Michigan families.
So do we need to hold a new revenue conference to rethink the numbers that are being used to create a budget so everybody affected has some level of certainty that a budget, once adopted, is a solid budget?
You know, we've talked about that with our economists and our fiscal agencies. They don't necessarily think that we need a new revenue estimating conference, but they do believe that we need to look at the realities of the balance sheet. I mean, there are significant requests on the table. You know, if we pour in billions of dollars for road funding, billions of dollars in cuts to social services and human services, there's not much left to negotiate for the other priorities that we hear about every single day. And so I think that we have the data we need. It's ultimately time for folks to get serious. And with the limited amount of time we have, the Senate is ready to begin this process, which again, normally takes weeks and weeks of negotiations. But, the House Republicans are trying to cram this entire process into a matter of a week or so. And that's really difficult.
You mentioned road funding, so let's quickly talk about the possibility of Governor Whitmer says that she doesn't see a final budget deal without road funding. The Democrats' budget plan in the Senate doesn't include funding for roads. What is going on here?
So the Senate proposal does leave space for up to $3 billion in road funding, but it also left space for us to figure out what was going to happen with that big, ugly bill at the federal level. Now that we know what's in our state's coffers, we have to make some pretty tough decisions. And so it's going to be a matter of how much revenue do we have to address our crumbling infrastructure? And also, how do we not sacrifice human services, healthcare? Most of us, when we go to our coffee hours and community gatherings, the number one thing we hear about is, yes, we hear about roads, but the number one thing we hear about is healthcare and making sure that education from K-12 to post-secondary is taken care of. And so we are trying to do it all. We're trying to solve our healthcare crisis, make sure folks have food, but yes, address our crumbling infrastructure. But we do have a lot less money to play with. And so that's where we are trying to find compromise. But we know that our governor has been laser focused on road funding. It is a very important factor, but we also have to look at those other essential services for people.
In the final couple moments that we have left with you, what comes next?
Well, what I hope comes next is that people in Michigan start to wake up and lift up their voices. The Senate has been very clear that we are holding the line for Michigan families, for healthcare, for childcare, for food assistance, for housing. We do not want an interruption of essential services for our seniors and our veterans. But we can't do that alone. We need people to step up and know that in the next couple of weeks, we are looking at some significant cliffs. If the cuts that the House Republicans are proposing stand, there will be real impacts to people in Michigan. And so I will be in the Capitol. I'll be negotiating. I'll be fighting to make sure that those services are maintained, but we can't do it alone. So folks need to start lifting up their voices and reaching out to their lawmakers and letting us know what's important to them.
Senator, how confident should Michiganders be at this moment that a budget bill will get done by October 1st in order to avert a partial government shutdown?
What I believe is people should continue to follow the process and know that, at least from the Senate's perspective, we are committed to avoiding a shutdown. But the way that the House Republicans has set this process up by engaging so late into the process, it is going to be extremely difficult. So it's not impossible, but I just have to warn people that with the set of circumstances we're left with due to the House Republicans, we have to be realistic about the timeline. So I'm optimistic that we're going to fight really hard, but I can't say with all certainty that we'll get to the finish line in the amount of time.
That is Democratic Senator Sarah Anthony, chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. That is the committee which oversees the budget in the Senate. Senator Anthony, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And we always want to hear from you. Do you have questions about the state budget? We are at politics@michiganpublic.org. Again, that's politics@michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.